I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak to you today. It's very interesting being the third speaker. I have slightly different perspective than some of the earlier speakers. And I was thinking particularly of Scott's comment, don't wait for the government. I work for the Alaska Energy Authority, which is a public corporation in the state of Alaska. But on the other hand, Scott works for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, which is another state agency. And I guess what struck me in thinking about that is we get some of our funding from Scott's agency, so there's a real connection there between Scott and my agency. And you might think, well, AEL&P is a private entity. Scott Willis doesn't work for the government, but AEL&P gets the vast majority of its power from Snettisham, and we'll be getting it from Lake Dorothy. Snettisham is owned by ADA, which is a sister corporation to my agency, and Lake Dorothy is actually financed by bonds from ADA. So my point is that there's a lot of interconnection and shared perspective between the speakers, and also that the government is a valuable partner. Don't wait for the government, but take advantage of the opportunities there. So these are some of the things I'm going to cover today, not necessarily sequentially. As I go through the different alternative energy programs we have at my agency, I'll talk about how they relate to opportunities for Juneau. Some of these things are obvious, and I don't need to mention. I don't want to miss an opportunity to mention soldiers dying in the Middle East. And then the phrase energy insecurity is something that is becoming more and more appealing to me. Energy security doesn't really cause any anxiety, but energy insecurity, I think, makes you think a little bit. And we actually have had fuel shortages in the past. Many of you in the audience may not have experienced them, but that's not unknown in the United States, and I believe that should be part of our thinking and part of our policy moving forward, to consider the possibility of not only very expensive fuel and climate change impacts, but also the possibility that there won't be fuel available. And then, as everybody's aware, there's an opportunity, and it's probably a window of opportunity with state funding for these types of projects. There's some interesting legislation moving through the legislature right now. While I was thinking about giving this presentation, it took me a while to really get my mind around it. I spend a lot of time working in communities that have extremely expensive energy kilowatt-hour costs on the order of 50 cents up to 80 cents. I believe there's a community in the state that's exceeded $1 per kilowatt-hour already. And then many of those communities don't have good alternatives to diesel. So Juneau is in many ways blessed with good renewable energy resources and a good utility that takes care of them. I've worked with AEL&P for a number of years now, and I've really enjoyed it. Utilities tend to be they have to be very conservative in their thinking and planning, because reliability is such an important aspect of utility work. And yet at AEL&P, the management is thinking seriously about what's going to happen in the future and looking at alternatives to traditional ways of generating electricity. So I won't spend much time on hydro and biofuels. And actually, there was another point I meant to put up here and I didn't get to, and that is that when you're thinking about renewable energy, it's very important not to assume that because something is technically feasible, that it's economic or a good idea. That's something that is a common approach that I think it's an important distinction. So my agency's mission is to reduce the cost of energy in Alaska. As I mentioned, we're a public corporation, sister agency to the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority. AEA owns Bradley Lake Hydro, which is the largest hydro in the state. The Alaska Intertie and a small hydro at Larsen Bay. Alaska is very fortunate. We get 26% of our electricity from hydro, from renewable energy resources. AEA has a new executive director. He's also referred to as the energy coordinator for the state. Steve Hagginson came from Golden Valley Electric Association. He's an electrical engineer with over 30 years of utility experience. And his primary goal is to develop a statewide energy plan, and he's planning to complete that by 2008. One of the first things he's planning to do is to send teams out to communities around the state to gather information on what people believe are the best energy resources to pursue locally. So I encourage you to participate in that process. The Alaska Energy Authority has got a large number of energy programs. I actually work in several of these. I work in bulk fuel system upgrades. We build tank farms around the state to replace the ones that don't comply with regulations and that some of them are leaking. We build new powerhouses, diesel powerhouses that have improved efficiency. And I also work in the geothermal and ocean and river energy programs. End-use efficiency is to my mind, always a place to start when you're looking at energy issues and conservation and trying to reduce costs. Study after study shows this is where you get your best bang for the buck. These are the programs that my agency runs around the state, but talking specifically about Juneau, which is our focus today, Scott gave an excellent description of heat pumps. AEL&P offices are heated and cooled with a heat pump. There are a few residences in Juneau as well that are heated with heat pumps, and there's a proposal to put a heat pump in at the airport as part of the renovations there. Lighting projects. We do lighting all over the state, but if you have any incandescent lights, you can save 70% of the energy right off the bat. And Scott went through the economics on that. These photos at the top are of a rural village. The graph at the bottom shows about 30% savings at a project I did in Pedro Bay. This is diesel efficiency, and this again falls under the category of energy efficiency gives you the best bang for the buck. It's a very important thing not to overlook when you're thinking about ways of reducing fossil fuel use. Scott spent quite a bit of time on hydro, so I won't spend much time on this. There's the picture of Bradley Lake, and here's some other hydros we've worked on. I guess one thing that does apply to Juneau, my agency is, with Denali Commission funding, is working on a retrofit of the hydro project in Pelican. Similar to Juneau, that hydro is impressively old. It's about 70 years old. It's got a yellow cedar wood stave penstock that is beginning to fail now. And the state, with federal assistance, is planning to spend a couple $1 million to refurbish that. One of the things that I like best about hydro is I think it lasts forever. And so even though it's, as Scott pointed out, it's very high capital cost, unless it stops raining, there's essentially infinite energy you get out of it, which is not necessarily true for many of the other choices. There's going to be a presentation later on biofuels, so I won't spend much time on this either, but our agency is involved around the state. Craig has got a wood boiler. We were involved in the development of fish oil use in Dutch Harbor, and actually there's over 1 million gallons of fish oil annually being burned in Dutch Harbor, and some of that is in diesel gensets mixed with diesel fuel. It's a very successful program because they're actually not only saving the diesel fuel, but they're avoiding the hazmat costs associated with getting rid of the fish oil. Geothermal, again, is one of the areas that I work in directly. That top right photo is the organic Rankine cycle generator at Chena Hot Springs. That project was commissioned in August of 2006. We're very proud of it. It's the first geothermal power plant in the state. It's offsetting significant diesel consumption there. And there are opportunities for developing geothermal other places around the state. This photo in the lower right corner is Mount Spur, across from the inlet from Anchorage. We had a workshop on Mount Spur last fall, and the Department of Natural Resources is working through a process to issue a solicitation for lease proposals at Mount Spur. Let's see, I think the next slide addresses, yeah, here we go. Around Southeast, there are a number of potential sites for geothermal development. These may affect Juneau if the interties that have been, the regional interties that have been proposed are built. Bell Island is possibly one of the near-term prospects because the Swantai intertie, which is under construction right now, goes right across the island. In fact, it's fascinating to fly over Bell Island and see the faults that transect that island, and also the where the intertie is likely to run across the island. Mount Edgecombe is about 15 miles from Sitka across open water. It's been labeled the best prospect for power generation in Southeast Alaska. We're working with Sitka. They're interested in finding out more about it, but they're in somewhat a similar situation to Juneau. As long as they can meet their needs with hydro or the vast majority of them, it's difficult to justify spending too much money on alternatives. And then in Teneke Inlet, there are a number of, aside from right at Teneke, where there is a geothermal resource, but it appears to be limited. There are other sites within the inlet that have significant surface temperatures and surface manifestations that suggest that there may be a significant geothermal resource. At the head of Teneke Inlet, there's a site that is not too far from logging roads that lead out of Hoonah, and that has one of the best prospects for geothermal development in the state. If an intertie is built from Juneau, or actually from Greens Creek onto Hoonah, that would technically make it feasible to consider development of geothermal at Teneke Inlet. But this falls in the category of things that are technically feasible, may or may not be economically justifiable. We're working on a couple different intertie projects and proposals around the state. Jim Strandberg is a project manager for the Alaska-BC intertie, which has been in the news quite a bit the last couple of years. It's a proposal to take cheap hydropower from southern Southeast, particularly from the Thomas Bay projects, if they're developed, and export it across the border. My agency has completed a report on that that's available on our website if you're interested. There's also the Hoonah intertie, which I just mentioned. I think that's one of the things that I've talked to Scott Willis and Tim McLeod about the most. I've been working in Hoonah the last several years. We're designing a powerhouse upgrade there, a new bulk fuel tank farm, and we've also identified 3 micro hydro sites that could be developed. So those are things that are all in interplay with the intertie to Hoonah. And there's a proposed intertie on Prince of Wales Island as well. Juneau has apparently several sites, and I don't have the details on this. AEL&P has looked into it a little bit. There are several potential sites for wind energy development. This would be wind turbines much larger than what are now being used in western Alaska on the scale of megawatt scale turbines. And one of the interesting things about the opportunity for wind energy development in Juneau is that there's actually a very nice, or potentially a very nice fit between hydropower, wind energy development, and diesel use. And that is, wind energy is intermittent. You can't turn it on when you want it. And so if you can't use the power that comes out of it when the wind is blowing, you quickly lose the economics of a wind project. But if you have storage hydro systems such as Juneau has, there's a potential for storing energy behind the dams. In other words, when the wind is blowing, you ramp your hydros down and the water levels rise. And so it's a very efficient way of storing energy, much more efficient than batteries, for example. And also it's been paid for. And then if the wind energy is used to offset diesel usage, that's a fairly high cost per kilowatt hour. At today's prices, the cost of diesel generated electricity is on the order of 20 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's quite expensive, particularly when you think that residential rates in Juneau are approximately 10 to 12 cents, in that range. So if you can offset very expensive electricity with wind energy and store the energy behind the hydro storage dams, it's worth analyzing, because that's a very interesting combination. And you'll also have an example to consider in Alaska, because Kodiak Electric is quite a ways down the road. They've already ordered their megawatt scale wind turbines, and they have they have a hydro, diesel, and will have a wind aspect to their generation mix. So the success of their programs should give Juneau some idea of what's possible here. Sitka is also looking at the same kind of thing as wind energy as a way to bridge those large step increases that Scott showed you on his graphs. You may be wondering about the title of this program and this technology. We actually struggled with it quite a while. We started with ocean energy, and then we kind of added in some of these other potentials for using the same technology, and talked about tidal energy. And in fact, my agency organized the first tidal energy conference in Alaska a little over a year ago down in Ketchikan. So the reason we call it ocean and river energy is because these types of devices can be used to capture the kinetic energy in a flowing stream of water, and that could be tidal, and it could be river as well. I don't have any wave energy devices on here because there isn't a lot of potential around Juneau for that. I guess I do want to mention the different things we're doing around the state. We're participating with EPRI, which is Electric Power Research Institute. It's a utility trade organization, in a study currently on river in-stream hydrokinetic devices, which is what we call the river applications of this technology. We've completed a tidal energy study with EPRI, and there are even more FERC applications going on, being applied for and actually being awarded in Alaska now that I mentioned up there, because they're happening very quickly. So here's a summary of things going on. I've already referred to the first two, but the third one, AP&T is a regional electric utility that has a utility in Eagle, Alaska on the Yukon River. And they got $1.6 million of funding last year to test a hydrokinetic device. ORPC is Ocean Renewable Power Corporation. They're also a device developer, and they're planning to test a device in an Alaskan river in 2009. And in one of our conceptual design reports for a small community named Igiugig on Lake Iliamna, we are including an analysis of a hydrokinetic device there. This is a page from the river study, the first draft, and as you can see, I've worked with Scott to include a site at the Taku River. It's not our best prospect because of debris in the river and ice and other things that are going on there, but there will be some results in that study on that particular site. I don't think river hydrokinetic is at the top of the list of potential technologies that are really going to make a difference in Juneau. But tidal energy has better prospects. So here's some photos of the device they're planning to test in Eagle. There's twin counter-rotating turbines. These are about 20 feet across in diameter, and each of those puts out about 45 kilowatts max. The device can be floated out into the river and then flooded. The tank at the bottom can be flooded to sink it to the bottom. This is a photo of the ORPC device. They're testing it in Maine right now. It's a horizontal axis helical turbine with a generator in the middle of it. And their prototype is rated at 200 kilowatts. Verdant Power has probably made the most progress in the United States in testing this kind of device. They actually have a tidal energy project in the East River of New York. They've had some problems recently with blade failure, but that's what happens in the early stages of technology development. As you'll notice, all of these devices that I've mentioned so far are not really what AEL&P would consider utility scale. They're small devices. This one's 34 kilowatts. This is from a study that EPRI did for us as part of development for that conference I mentioned in Ketchikan, and it identified several sites in the Juneau region that have significant tidal energy potential. I put this up just to show you some of the numbers. Let's see. Just to give you a sense of the energy we're talking about, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts, and the last device I showed you was 34 kilowatts. North Indian Pass has 1,600 megawatts, or 1.6 million kilowatts of energy. Now that can't all be developed, but theoretically you can develop about 1/6 of the energy that's in a channel for power generation, and this is average energy flowing through that area. And I put this up there not to say that this is feasible and the best way to go, but to say that there's a lot of energy available in the tides, and it's an interesting thing to analyze and pursue further. Actually, I'll skip to this slide. It's not very clear, but down at the bottom there, this is one of the largest crane barges in the world, and I'm very excited about what's happened this week. 2 days ago, the first utility scale tidal energy device was put in the water at Strangford Low off the coast of Ireland. And that, you can see it there. It's the same thing as this device here. And those are twin counter-rotating turbines that produce 600 kilowatts each. So that's a 1.2 megawatt device. And when you go from tens or hundreds of kilowatts to megawatts, that's when you, in my mind, at least for Alaskan purposes, you go to utility scale devices. There are 3 of these devices. The company's name is Marine Current Turbine, And there are 3 of these planned for installation off the coast of British Columbia next year. So that'll be 3.6 megawatts of tidal power potential there. So I think there are a lot of different opportunities for Juneau to consider, and it's important to look at as many as you can and analyze them appropriately. I really appreciate the role AEL&P has played and continues to play. I'm working with them on tidal energy projects, and my agency is working with them on providing some wind energy information as well. I'll go back to my original theme. Energy efficiency is definitely the place to start. And then this last point, I didn't get the chance to talk to Scott about this before I put my presentation together. So this may be a somewhat different perspective from AEL&P's. But I actually think that obviously there isn't a lot of opportunity to develop new renewable energy that today would offset diesel power for electrical purposes in Juneau. However, the real significant fossil fuel use in Juneau that has potential to be offset with renewable energy is transportation and space heating. And I think it's possible that there may be a little bit of a rude awakening when plug-in hybrids become available next year or the year after that. There could be, I know Juneau folks in general are very interested in energy issues and environmental issues. If there's a wholesale switch to driving plug-in hybrids, that will have a big impact on that curve that Scott had up earlier. And if it means that the electricity comes from the very significant diesel capacity that AEL&P has, well, then I would second Scott's perspective that there really aren't environmental benefits to that. But if there are opportunities to develop, for example, wind energy or tidal, and also improve energy efficiency in Juneau, I think there's real potential for fuel switching from fossil fuels to renewable generated electricity in the areas of space heating and transportation. So I wanted to put in a plug for actually it's every 18 months. We have a rural energy conference, and this year it's going to be in Girdwood in September. You can find out more about it on our website, which is akenergyauthority.org. And I also wanted to mention I brought some of the renewable energy atlases down that my agency has produced, and there's a pile of them at the entrance up there. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
So I think we have time for one question now, and then there's obviously more time later in the roundtable. So.
Great presentation. Several years ago, I was involved in putting a 3.5 megawatt windmill off the coast of Spain. And one of the things we did with that is excess electricity we generated with it, we turned that into hydrogen and used that to power the public transportation buses around Barcelona and those places. It sounds like there may be some possibility of having excess electricity from time to time here, or with wind power. And have you considered that kind of scenario?
There hasn't been a lot of analysis done in the state. There has been some, and actually I forgot to mention one of the things that I've talked to Tim McLeod and Scott about at AEL&P is the possibility of hydrogen production, or ammonia, which is also another potential source of or energy storage medium like hydrogen. To be honest with you, I think for today, that falls in the category of things that are technically feasible. They're very interesting. They're worth studying. The economics are not as attractive as many of the alternatives to that are. You lose a very significant amount of the energy when you produce hydrogen. I believe the first step of electricity to hydrogen is about 50% energy loss. And then when you store it, there's energy required to compress it probably. it's actually very difficult to store hydrogen for long periods of time. The materials are either very expensive or the tanks leak. And then when you, for example, if you used hydrogen in an internal combustion engine to produce electricity at the other end, your efficiency was probably on the order of 30–40%. Or if you put it in a fuel cell, it's marginally better efficiency.
The only reason it ever makes sense is if you have excess electricity that's being generated.
That's right. No, I agree with you completely. And if you're spilling water in a hydro system, that's a great use of the energy. Wind energy in Alaska is actually very expensive these days on a per kilowatt hour basis. And so we do have a problem with, at times, for example, in those western villages, there's the wind comes up so quickly, or the loads are not high enough to use all of it, and so they have to get rid of it somehow. So that is an issue, but hydrogen has potential in Alaska. We're very interested in it. We do have a small hydrogen program, but the economics are daunting today.
So great, thanks a lot, David.